I will go ahead and introduce Dr. Rose Ogutu, my colleague from Delaware State University, and she is the horticulture specialist and has been doing quite a bit with high tunnels in the last several years. So.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? I hope you can.
We can hear you.
Jason, am I clear? Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about IPM in high tunnel production. Well, and I hope that you'll be able to get one or two from this presentation. It's great to have had those two speakers that have gone forth, and I'm glad that they mentioned something about diseases, IPM, and it's going to just tie in great with this talk. So just an announcement before I go further, high tunnel systems are eligible for financial assistance. So if you want a high tunnel, you can still, contact the NRCS office in your local place or your local city or county, and then they will be able to guide you on how to get one. So this system allows you to kind of plan for one, and then they pay for a percentage of your expenses for the high tunnels. So I would like to say that high tunnels are still pretty popular. And at this point, I would like to share with you some data that was collected by my colleague from Penn State Center for High Tunnel Research and Education. That's Mr. Mike Ozolek. And Mike actually got this data from the NRCS. Yeah, just an announcement, as I said, you can still get high tunnels from the NRCS through their assistance. You can have some of the expenses actually met for you. So the high tunnels are still popular, and I would like to share some data that was put together by Mike Ozolek of Penn State Center of High Tunnel Research and Education. So Mike had been working for high tunnels for some time, and he reached out to a lot of people in the region working with high tunnels. And this was in 2019, so about 3 years ago. And you can see that by that time, NRCS, and these are just high tunnels that have been put up by, with the assistance of NRCS, not by individuals. 89 in Delaware, that's a whooping number. And you can see, the other states and the numbers attached to them, and a total of 1,718 high tunnels in the region. So we're still going strong with high tunnels, despite some of the challenges that some of the growers have had. So still popular for season extension, and one of the things that challenges us is that the extended season makes them attract pests, because remember, like, you are in the winter and you still have crops growing on, and maybe you don't have a chance to kill some of the pests that could have been killed if they were outside, if your plants were outside and so forth. So as much as you start early when the pests are not yet really built up, but at the same time, you have pests lingering on for longer periods of time because of the temperatures in the high tunnel. So these ones lend themselves very much attractive to pests. Now, the early crop production in them, though, help because, you kind of start before, the insect population becomes too high. So just some IPM reminders. Remember, IPM stands for Integrated Pest Management, and it's a balanced way of taking care of pests. So you use cultural methods, physical methods, biological and chemical methods. You use them in a balanced way. You don't only zero in on one. So that means it's economically feasible, environmentally friendly, and socially responsible. Of course, it's based on principle of economic thresholds. You don't just start spraying maybe a plant when it has just 3 or 4 aphids or something like that. They have to be at a threshold that will economically damage your crop. So there's always some leeway. And of course, when we talk about pests, we're referring to pests as in insects and so forth, and some diseases too. So This just shows that diseases in high tunnels is a concern, disease and pest management. Sometime in 2013 to 2018, we had quite a number of high tunnel workshops at our premises at Smyrna Smyrna Outreach Center. And every time we gave surveys, and this is just one of the surveys we did to farmers who had shown up. And the question was, how would you prioritize the following challenges in high tunnel production? Now, this was in 2016, after we had had a range of workshops for 3 years. And this is what the participants said, and the participants were about 48 high tunnel workshop attendees. 23% of them said disease and pest management was a challenge. But if you look at other challenges too, I mean, other challenges that are indicated, A, B, D, and E, they all, kind of help or augur around disease and pest management, because, you can manage that by scheduling your crops. Water and nutrient management is really great. We know pests sometimes don't affect healthy plants as much as they do non-healthy ones. Weed management is great because when you weed your crops, it's kind of good sanitation, and then it helps you get rid of some of the pests and diseases. And then ventilation, heat, and humidity is a really big thing because high tunnels are an enclosure, and they kind of have a lot of heat and humidity in them, especially if you don't have a good airflow system going. So let's look at some of the microenvironment situations in the high tunnels that kind of favor or not favor pest populations. So high tunnels normally have a passive ventilation. Remember, it's a semi-enclosed structure. And then ventilation is normally just by natural air movement. So by either rolling up the sides or maybe opening up the roof vent, you get the ventilation. And depending on the kind of design you have, air movement could become restricted. And if you restrict air movement and you have plants that are really high enough or concentrated enough, you have canopy, you have some pockets of high temperature and humidity. And everyone and humidity are very particular when it comes to how they help in pest and disease growth. So some of the insects like aphids and whiteflies really prefer those humid conditions, and they rapidly increase. And of course, whiteflies, their life cycle even shortens a whole lot with high temperatures. And so ventilation is very important aspect of high tunnels. Now, the high tunnels in their nature also exclude rainfall. So you kind of cannot grow in a high tunnel without irrigation. You have to have some kind of irrigation. And this, of course, will kind of point to what kind of pests you get in, because if the leaves remain dry, then of course, that means that you're helping eliminate some of the pests that don't like dryness. And then the moisture, the high humidity, of course, means that when you get aphids, the population explodes, at a very rapid speed. They really rapidly explode, and soon enough you have many whiteflies and many aphids if you don't have enough airflow. And the direct force of falling rain normally does not favor insects. So sometimes, when you consider high tunnel and outside growing, in some ways, the rainfall is a plus because it helps kind of wash off some of those insects that are lingering on the leaves. So this is not there in high tunnel. So some people, to kind of get that into the mix, they use sprinklers or sometimes just wash off the leaves of the plant. But of course, everything comes with has a downside. So you might be wetting the plants, getting more mildew in, but sometimes it's good to wash them off just to help, eradicate the insects. Now, another thing about high tunnels is that people tend to cram a lot of plants inside them. So the planting density and diversity is a lot, like this picture that you see of these high tunnels, somebody having corn in and, you know, and some kind, I mean, all kinds of crops growing in because, you know, it's expensive and you want to maximize space. So this means that if you have those ravaging insects, they migrate readily between host crops and they're really happy in there. So you might also have difficulty in managing insects because you can see the crops when they are all grown, they kind of merge into each other so that there's no space in between. So this might also be challenging when you're using pesticides. So all in all, I would say that, you know, some aspects of environmental conditions in the high tunnel lead to pests, you know, explosion or attract pests. But at the same time, the semi-open structure lends in itself to good IPM principles or maybe IPM practices. So it's a mixed bag of goodies for high tunnels. So some of the pests and diseases that are linked with the high tunnel environmental conditions are like aphids and thrips and two-spotted spider mites, whiteflies, cucumber beetles. And the diseases that most people complain about are leaf mold, botrytis, powdery mildew. And you can imagine all this is in some way or the other related to high temperatures and humidity, or, you know, the type of crops that are very popularly grown in high tunnels and so forth. So when we talk about IPM implementation, one of the things that I'm hammering at is we have to first be able to identify the pests. So identification of the pests is normally very, very important. And then of course you have to evaluate the pest infestation level and then assess the tolerance level of the injury that the pest might cause. And then you take action. So sometimes, you know, sometimes you see pests and kind of with time, you know, the pests kind of just go away, maybe because there's a temperature change, maybe, you know, there's a cold spell that has come in and eliminated or maybe interrupted the cycle of growth, or sometimes, you know, you come in with a sprinkler and wash some of them off and stuff like that, or maybe you've harvested off some of the plants, therefore removing the surface area on which they were attached. So IPM is, it's just like the way, if you have these principles down, it's the way you think about it. You think about at what level do I need to control my pests so that I'm not just unwantonly, you know, using pesticides or unwantonly being worried about injury or nothing. So when it comes to pest monitoring, there are a lot of ways in which we can monitor pests. So early pest detection is very key, but, you know, you cannot know what a pest is and what a beneficial insect is and what, you know, what is causing what injury if you can't identify them. So I would say that it's always good to know your pests, and I'm glad that most growers know their pests. You know, beginning growers soon learn about what pest is, you know, more damaging than the other, and what pests they can live with, and what, you know, pest attacks which crops. So we have to be very vigilant when it comes to knowing what pests we have. So we normally have our extension offices, and it's okay to go to them and ask about the pest identification. The master gardeners are always there to help in, you know, helping us identify some of the pests that we have and so forth. So you can either use, for identification, you can use the yellow sticky cards. For aphids, for example, the blue sticky cards, and you can put them on some of the hot spots. And when you see some of those insects attached to them, then you know that, oh, you know, I probably have a problem there. And sometimes you just walk around with white paper and, you know, just shake the leaves on it, shake the leaves, and then, you know, get the insects flowing over, and then you know that, okay, I'm about to have an explosion of this many aphids and so forth. So it's very, very important that you monitor. And sometimes people use pheromones, they use traps to just help them, monitor plants. These are just pictures that show how people monitor plants, pests in high tunnels. You can see various pictures of high tunnels, mostly in Delaware, one in University of Delaware, and Hartley, Seaford, and Townsend. And you can see some of the high tunnels having the yellow cards on them. That means the grower is probably, monitoring maybe, population of aphids or population of, other insects that will stick on the yellow sticky cards. For the thrips, for example, mostly they use the blue sticky cards. So pest monitoring is very, very important because it helps you develop some strategy. Now, for example, this is just about monitoring over time of a person who's been, in a college that they were growing strawberry in high tunnels. So then they realize that, and sometimes it's good to keep data too. So you realize that, okay, between this time and this time, I probably have, I'll most likely have a problem with cutworms. And or between October and April, maybe about April, the explosion of spider mites is most likely going to be high, maybe because of the temperatures that are there. And this helps you so that if you're using spray chemicals or if you are any other means that you're using to get rid of these pests, you can plan for those. So it's always good to monitor the pest populations. Now, when it comes to IPM in high tunnels, one of the things that growers have lately been very interested in is the exclusion of pests in high tunnels. High tunnels are structures. So the thing is, you can imagine that growers are thinking, okay, if it's a structure, then I could cover my high tunnel, or I could try to exclude, some of these insects from coming in. And some of the strategies of exclusion have really been worked on. And so, of course, a lot needs to be done. Because when you think about exclusion, you're thinking about insect screens. And when you're thinking about insect screens, you're thinking about maybe the size of the screens versus the size of the insect that you're targeting. Some of the insects are really small, like the aphids. So if you have to use a netting, for example, wouldn't it then, just give you more heat in the greenhouse by, becoming as an enclosure itself. So it depends. If you're dealing with cucumber beetles, it's a different thing. So it's very important that you know what kind of screen to use, what kind of insect you're targeting, and so forth. So studies have been done in various colleges. I know that Purdue, Alabama A&M have been working on some pest exclusion techniques. And this is just but a setup, the way you do your research outside, but you can also do them inside just to know which insects will crawl into which, set of screens. So a lot of people have done tests onto what kind of screen to use for what kind of pest. So farmers have adopted some of these pest exclusion techniques, and these are some of the pictures of greenhouses, high tunnels that have these nets on them, this netting material, and then just to maybe keep away if it's cucumber beetles or some kind of aphids and so forth. Now it normally depends on the value of the crop that you have, and some crops are really of high value and you really want to protect them, so you can invest in getting these nets. So the shade cloth based systems help exclude pests too. And you can see that you clearly have to line it out in a way that you're not getting the high tunnel to be hotter inside. Now, for tomatoes, for example, it's very hard to use most kinds of nettings on tomato. Because if you accrue more heat, you're gonna interfere with the flowering at some point. So it's very, very important that you know when put in the netting and when not to put in the netting and the size of the netting that you need. So pest exclusion is just like when you have a net house whereby you try to exclude stuff. For example, if you want to exclude thrips, then you need very fine material. And sometimes you wonder whether do you take off the plastic and then just cover your high tunnel with a net, or what do you do? It depends on the magnitude of the pest pressure that you're facing, and how much trouble you want to go to take care of that. So screening the sides of the high tunnel, because remember the sides are the ones that allow ventilation, but sometimes you'll need to screen them, and you can see on these pictures, although they're not very clear, the sides of the high tunnel are screened, or sometimes just individually inside the high tunnel you have screens covering the plants. And normally it's very important that you know the mesh size that you're using. For example, if the net size is porous enough, it will not obstruct airflow and it will be good. But if it's too small and the net size is too small, then of course it's gonna obstruct the airflow. As much as the insects are not gonna get in, but you obstruct the airflow, you probably increase the heat and the humidity in the high tunnel. So I would like to talk about a little study that examined the efficacy of placing insect exclusion screens on high tunnel control of cucumber beetles and bacterial wilt. And this was done at Purdue University. Now, the cucumber beetles are a big problem, especially because they also they also cause the bacterial wilt, because the virus that causes the bacterial wilt, they just work together with that cucumber beetle, and you have the mess that you have on a cucumber plant. So this study recommended some size that was supposed to be used, and they tested, both small and medium-sized and large-sized mesh. They settled for the intermediate meshes. And some of the growers who normally experience cucumber beetles have started using the nets. However, when it comes to cucumber beetles, it being a serious pest, sometimes the traps also work. And you would like to know what kind of cucumber beetles that you're using. So the cucumber beetle that you are protecting your crops from. We have two major types of cucumber beetles. There is the Acalima. Now the Acalima, they are these striped cucumber beetles. They have the yellow, the black stripes among the yellow body, and then they are not attractive to lures, so if you use any lures to attract them and then maybe kill them, then you're not gonna be doing any good job. So this Acalima, as opposed to the Diabrotica, which is spotted, the yellow spotted cucumber, they're different in the ways in which you have to deal with them if you're using this cultural method of exclusion. So the cucumber and the eggplants can normally handle the additional heat from decreased ventilation. Therefore, many growers have gotten into using the netting system to help with getting rid of the cucumbers, getting rid of the beetles in the high tunnels. So tomatoes and pepper will not tolerate the decreased ventilation. So that means that if you have any such kind of size of pest to exclude, you'll not be able to use the mesh. So you'll have to look for other ways of getting rid of those. Now, some of the ways that have also been looked into are the use of trap crops, for example, to kind of manage cucumber beetles too. And one of the studies that is being done at Missouri University, Lincoln University of Missouri, found out that the cucumbers that they had that were grown along with the amaranth were not much affected by the beetles, by the cucumber beetles, because most of the cucumber beetles preferred, the amaranth. Now, the trap crops are very, very important because they attract these agricultural pests, and usually they attract them from your main crop, and therefore you can, tackle the pests from there, either spray them or, just harvest off the plant when they've already been ravaged, and taking away the pests, with them too, with the harvested crop. So the banker crops also help quite a bit. And the banker crops help because they will always harbor some of those parasitoids that you need to kind of help you manage your pests. So trap crop and banker crop concept is very, very important. And some of the trap crops would include like nasturtium crops, the marigolds, and so forth. That's why sometimes you see growers, having some of those marigolds or mustard or nasturtiums, along with their crops, so that they use them as a trap crop. And the banker crops, now these ones, of course, they support and maintain mainly the biological populations. And you can use oat or wheat plants. There are some ornamental paper that you can use, and for thrips, for example, you can use ornamental paper and castor bean or wheatgrass. It's very, very common, mullein or wheatgrass. They will keep the thrips of the plant, of the plants, because they will have the thrips. They will have some of those biological insects that work on those thrips, they will harbor those biologicals. So trap and banker crops concept is a very important in high tunnel production. And a lot of growers are now incorporating some of these plants with their major economical plants, so that, they kind of, help with the pest management. Now, one of the questions that we asked our attendees in the high tunnel, in a high tunnel workshop was whether they would use biological control, whether they thought biological control was viable for high tunnels. Remember, many people see high tunnels more like greenhouses, and actually, when you survey the market, when you're looking for chemicals to spray, you'll always see that most of the chemicals that are recommended for the greenhouses are the ones that are recommended for high tunnels. Because it's an enclosure, you're not gonna spray any chemical that you can spray out there. You have to go in for the chemicals that are recommended for greenhouses. So, looking at that, then you like, okay, they use a lot of biocontrol in the greenhouses because they're completely covered. So could we use them in the semi-covered structures of high tunnels? And this is what the growers thought. 92% of them actually say they thought that it would work. And I think going forward, the way that people have been, handling most of the research towards successful greenhouse, high tunnel production, you see that a lot of people are also getting into using biological control to control pests in high tunnels. Now, remember, when you are using biological control, you probably have to think about the banker crops, because biological agents are normally very expensive, and you release them, and you don't want, you want to kind of maintain them and maintain their support. So in one way or the other, as much as you have your crops, you should always incorporate some banker crops to help you maintain or sustain the populations of the biocontrols. Now, for studies that we've done at DSU, when it comes to biological control, some of the considerations that we normally say that people have to look into is that timing of the release of these biological control agents is very key, because sometimes, okay, for example, we get ours from New York laboratories, and then they're shipped. When they're shipped in, you get them, and if you say, okay, I'm gonna wait for 2 days before I release them, most likely you will have lost, the population, because maybe they came in a temperature controlled container. So you have to be very vigilant on timing of the release. I mean, you get your shipment of the agents, and you have to know whether to release it immediately, and are you going to release it when, in the middle of the heat in the high tunnel, or are you going to wait until the temperatures die down? Are you going to release them in the evening so that you give them some time to, kind of get used to the environment by morning and so forth? So you have to really follow the rules when it comes to releasing the agents. So you have to have some scouting program in place, because sometimes, people who use biocontrols, they also use chemicals, and sometimes, you might have spray and you're killing your biologicals too. And of course, you also want to release these agents when the pests are there to be eaten by the agents. So you don't, you want to release them at that time, but you also don't want to wait until the pest is overwhelming, because then you will not see any change, because it takes time for them to also be active and, start ravaging on their target. Temperatures are crucial for activity, and this is even just for the growth of the biologicals, and for their flying habits, and for their eating and so forth. So you have to be very careful. You cannot, sometimes if the weather is too cold, some of them are not too active, so they're not even gonna ravage on their target. Some water source is very important for ladybugs. I remember I worked with a grower down at Sussex County, and they used ladybugs, and one time the ladybugs were not even doing anything. And then we found them in a corner, just in a corner where there was some little water, because they were thirsty. So they just went and, grouped themselves somewhere, and they were not doing the job. They were not eating they were not ravaging on their target, but they were just, sitting somewhere waiting to get drops of water to drink. So have some water source in your high tunnel if you're using ladybugs and so forth. So those are just but some of the considerations that we can talk about as people who've been working with some kind of biological control studies. Now, yeah, I've already said this. So demonstration trials at DSU explored the use of biologicals, and we incorporated bunker plants, and also we also kind of saw the importance of vertical plantings in high tunnels, because when it comes to the population, the ultimate population of plants, or the ultimate foliage that you will have when the plants grow big, if you have some vertical planting, it helps, because it helps like with ventilating the whole system. Other than you have the plants growing all over, you can have some of them being ventilated vertically. So that's why people are more successful growing plants that grow vertically in high tunnels, because they are very, very easy to ventilate, especially with good pruning and good trellising. So one of the pests that really is a problem in high tunnels is aphids. And aphids, as you know, they give birth to their young ones alive. So before you know it, you have many aphids. And I think aphids, when they poop, they just poop the babies. They just poop the babies, and when the temperatures are right, before you know it, the whole place is full of aphids. Now their colors could be green, black, depending on maybe the sap of the color of the sap of the plant that they are ravaging on. So sometimes even if you have beets, you can have reddish colored aphids. So some of the biologicals that predate on aphids are the ladybugs. As I said, the ladybugs, very important, and they are very cheap too, and they're very easy to maintain. If you are somebody who's just starting to use biologicals, they're actually, to me, they're the easiest to use, to use the ladybugs. And then, of course, there's the Aphidius colemani, and then these ones normally lay eggs inside the aphid larvae, and then you then have black mummies of aphids laying around. So it's always important to actually know what a ladybug looks like, what the Aphidius colemani could look like. It looks like a little ant, so that when you are targeting the pest that you're killing, you're not killing your biologicals. So whiteflies are also a major pest, and both the adult and the larvae extract food from the plant. They can really ravage your plant, and they also produce honeydew, and the honeydew attracts black mold. So sometimes your crops would really not be sightly by the time you're harvesting them. They can really devastate your high tunnel because their life cycles are really shortened when it comes to the temperatures that are in the high tunnels. Now, some of the predators that can be used against whiteflies are Encasia, or the Eretmoceras, or the Encasia, and these ones predate on whiteflies. Now, a lot of work has been done on Encasia formosa and Eretmoceras eremicas, and if you happen to get those from anybody who's selling the biological agents, make sure that the temperature is right in the high tunnel, because these ones, they really work best when the temperature is above 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and they will successfully control the whiteflies, especially if you release them at the right time. You release them when the whiteflies population is not too much. So we also have thrips. Just like in the greenhouses, thrips can really be a disaster in the high tunnels. And these ones, they just look like a little eye figure, or just like a cigar end, very tiny. But when you have thrips, you can always release the Ambicelius, Neoscilus, Cucumeris, and then those ones will ravage the thrips, and you just release them at the right time. Now, for these Cucumeris, or the Ambicelius, the trap crops are the marigold trap crops, and these ones really keep up with the population of those predators. Now, spider mites are also a menace, and of course, you don't have any traps or lures for monitoring mites, but mites can be really ravaging on strawberry and even tomatoes. Now, you'll always see webs, you'll always see the two spotted spider mites with two big eyes on their sides. And to control those, you can use the Phytocilus, the Passimilis, and or the Neoscilus californicus. And these ones also, we got ours from the New York laboratories. Now, they normally actively search for the spider mites, and then they feed on them. They feed on the internal fluids and then kill them. So the spider mites can also just be controlled using the insecticidal soaps, and then some of those simple kind of sprays that you use. But of course, those sometimes those might not be very effective when the population is high. So I would say when you're practicing IPM, you have to really know your friends. You have to really know, I mean, when you're using biologicals, know what beneficial insects are, know the predatory flies, know what the assassin bag looks like, parasitic flies. Normally in Delaware Cooperative Extension, in the Delaware Cooperative Extension, we have times when we have professionals kind of having presentations on how to identify these. So if you have time, please always look into their schedules and join the groups that are touring and identifying some of these biologicals, because they really help you when it comes to identifying what helps you in your high tunnel. So it's always also good to grow habitat plants because they harbor a lot of biologicals, or they harbor a lot of the good friends that kind of work on your pests. So grow good habitat plants. They always help. So we can also explore other cultural control methods like early planting, sanitation, growing vigorous crop varieties, using trap cropping that we've already talked about, and then using natural enemies, and having vertical plantings for more ventilation. So one of the ways in which we can make sure that there is some sanitation is weeding up the high tunnel. And this was done in UD, whereby just to get rid of the weeds, soil solarization was used. And in this, you just cover the ground with transparent plastic, and then cover it over for days. And under the heat of the greenhouse, this actually just cooks the weeds, and sometimes it also, kills some of the fungi or bacteria or nematodes that are in the ground. So when instead of just having your high tunnel lay fallow, sometimes you can do some soil solarization. So vertical planting is very important because it helps air out your high tunnel, as you can see from these photos. So that, and then of course, always space your plants adequately so that you get some air going through the plant. So of course, you cannot only rely on the cultural ways, you have to use chemicals sometimes. And I'm just gonna say that spot treatment may be adequate for treating hot spots. And you could, if you know the hot spots, you could spray those using whatever is recommended, and avoid high temperatures in the high tunnel by always ventilating your high tunnel and so forth. So always use pesticides with low toxicity, because high tunnels are semi-structures, semi-enclosed structures. So this will be very safe for you, safe for the users, and so forth. So, and then of course, you have to really follow the rules such that if you sprayed anything, you have to let people know that you have sprayed. So avoid pollinator activity and beneficial insects when you are spraying, or when you are, locally targeting the spots to spray. So you have to, you have to be balanced when it comes to insecticidal, the use of insecticides or use of pesticides, because one of the things that we have to be vigilant about in IPM is to make sure that we're not killing the biologicals, we're not killing the beneficials. We are, just targeting the pests, the pest population. So the pesticides have to be compatible with the biological agents. So some of the pesticides that are compatible with these agents are just the simple ones that we know of: the horticultural oils, the insecticidal soaps, the BT and the neem. And the complaint normally is that these don't work, but it's because we don't spray them at the right time. So monitoring is really key. In IPM, monitoring is really key. Now, I would like to stop there, and I acknowledge my graduate student, Rosalind Battle, undergraduate student Imani Murphy, for the work they've been doing in the high tunnels, and the famous DSU small farms crew, very, very important people. And then, of course, the UD collaborators on the EIP grant that, helped kind of fund some of the work that we do with IPM in high tunnels. So do we have any questions?
Yes, Rose, we do have several questions. The first question, I think you kind of answered it a little bit, but Saladin said, what is the difference between a high tunnel and a greenhouse? And can you use an exhaust fan in a high tunnel and lighting for plants, blue or red bulbs, etc.?
Well, the difference between a high tunnel and a greenhouse is that for greenhouses are covered with, transparent material, fully covered, but they could also be having lighting in them. They could be having hot water heating in them, and they could be having, fans to ventilate. So it's more of a high-tech high tunnel. So in the high tunnel, on the other hand, it's just open ground covered with, a sheet of plastic paper, and then you grow on the ground. Now, the question of whether you can use, what was it? Can you use the lights in the high tunnel? You could,
yeah, lights and an exhaust fan.
You could use that, and you could use that, but it's only that if NRCS has given you money to build the high tunnel, you have to wait until 3 years. So for 3 years, you just have to plant on the ground, no use of other lights and so forth. So after 3 years, then you can, play around with all those things. Because I know of growers who are now even growing in containers or even incorporating benches on their high tunnels because they think that is working. So yeah, you can do that.
I think you nailed it when you on the end there, where you said basically a high tunnel is where you plant into the ground. Normally a greenhouse structure would be something that you have a solid structure that's non-mobile. You could actually take a high tunnel down and move it to another location if you needed to rotate for ground rotation for crops, things like that, where a greenhouse would be a solid structure, requires a permit. It will be something that has, everything that a construction building would have, whereas a tunnel doesn't fall under that same preview. And you could put heat in there for emergency use, but typically it doesn't hold where you have heating systems in there. You can certainly have fans and lights and things in there as well, but that's really the biggest difference.
Thank you, John.
So there was another question earlier, kind of a statement. Someone made a statement that it's too windy in Delaware to have a high tunnel. And then there was some conversation in the chat from Toby. He said he has 2 high tunnels through the NRCS EQIP program in a very windy location, and they have been fine for several years. Not saying that wind damage does not happen, but Nationwide Insurance is one of the only insurance companies that still covers high tunnels, only for structural damages or destruction, not for the plastic. But maybe now you could kind of talk about, some things you can do to help mitigate that the wind damage on a high tunnel.
Yeah, and I hope John and Jason are gonna jump in here. So the windiness in of locations where high tunnels are, that's a big problem. We've had a really big problem at Smyrna or Outreach Center ourselves. However, we've had some, luck with one of the high tunnels. One of our oldest high tunnels has got some windshield, like wind guards, so that, to protect it from the wind. And one of the things that we also realized is that you can tie down the plastic using bands so that, you tie them onto the arcs that cover the plastic to just reinforce it for more reinforcements. But most important is when you are putting down this high tunnel, you have to make sure that you are orientating it the best way. You're putting it into a place where maybe there is some shelter, some, just some trees up, providing I'm mitigating the force of the wind by not letting too much wind hit your high tunnel and so forth. So John,
yeah, I'll echo that. Where, you know, actually at our location in the Smyrna Outreach and Research Center, we have had some serious wind issues. We had a low depression storm come through that was a very severe thunderstorm that, you know, they don't count as a tornado, but it has certainly had some very destructive winds, actually bend the frames on several of our tunnels to the point where, you know, it would have to be disassembled and then you'd have to rebend all the metal or replace those to put it back together. So we have lost plastic different times, but we did see, you know, this past year, some extremely destructive wind patterns that did more damage than we've seen in the past. I think Rose is correct. If you, in a situation like that, we are discussing with the dean, potentially putting in some arborvitae or some sort of shield to kind of just break the shear winds that come across the open fields to where our tunnels are located. And that might mediate some of the damage. So we did put corners on. We found that early on that it would tear the side walls, and a corner wooden structure or polycarbonate structure in the corners would stop that damage, which worked for years. But like I said, this past year we had where it totally destroyed, you know, the metal in itself. So it definitely was beyond just a little bit of wind. We had an extreme situation that we had to control.
I'll just add in, or I guess echoing that location is really important. At our farm in Smyrna, I guess there's a lot of people on here that have never been to a conference, so they probably haven't been to our farm, but it's about as open as you can be where these tunnels are. It's a great spot for demonstrations, easily accessible, but not great for windbreak. It's also really important when you first put the plastic on to have it really tight. And then we use the bands on top of that, which help. But there are a lot of tunnels in Delaware that don't use bands. They just have the plastic, and they've not had many problems. I've talked to and kind of surprised how many people have not really seen that wind damage that we have.
Sorry. Thank you, Jason. So there was a little bit more feedback. Robin said, thank you for your feedback. Toby, my calculations suggested the plastic cover damage could become cost prohibitive. How have you offset such damage costs?
Well, you know, for us, it's a different story because maybe, I mean, when we have those damages, we probably have to just write more funds and get more money from the federal government to help us, you know, buy more plastic. But I don't know from a farmer's perspective, I mean, how that would be, because I don't know whether the NRCS, I'm not very sure whether the NRCS is gonna, you know, help you with acquiring a second plastic when, you know, when it's done, when you've already, you know, gotten the past. Yeah, so.
They do not. I mean, plastic is definitely on the producer. Once the structure is built, it is up to the producers to maintain them. So if you had to cut the plastic for a snow load, or if the wind tore it up, it is your responsibility to replace it and put it back on. So that is definitely something you have to keep in mind.
So I guess it goes to say, you know, if you're planning on getting a high tunnel, you know, think about your location first. You know, try to make sure you've got a wind block. Judy did mention in the comment, you know, very good point here. This is her Master Gardener hat. How about using a mixed border pollinator strip instead of just arborvitae? So mixed deciduous and evergreen trees, shrubs, and forbs. So good point, Judy. Bring in those pollinators.
Mhm.
Yes,
So thank you, Rose. You've done a Thank you, Rose. You've done a great job. So there is another comment here. Our tunnels at Smyrna, this is from Tom Harmon, who works there at the farm. Our tunnels at the Smyrna farm have done really well considering their age. Last year was an exception to the rule, higher winds than usual, and at one storm, I'm sure we had tornado damage. Another question in here, are they eco-friendly plastics?
That's a good question.
They do have them. The problem is you don't get the longevity out of them for the cost. The situation for tunnels, you need that heavier mill plastic to sustain, because you want to try to get 4 or 5 years out of a plastic on your tunnel. And if you try to go to a situation where you're trying to use something that's biodegradable or certainly low input or more conscientious style plastics, they do not last very long on the tunnels.
Yeah, because ours are not biodegradable. They're not eco-friendly.
So there's another a kind of a comment that Robin has found that some suppliers increased their cost during the time frame of the grant application. So if anyone knows of any good suppliers for plastic, if you want to type them in the chat, that could help Robin out. And then down here at the bottom, Cheris asked, what do you do with your plastic waste? And then someone said Toby said some companies will recycle ag plastic, but they can be hard to find.
I don't know. Tom, are you around? What do we do with our plastic waste? You know, we put it in the trash.
We repurpose some of it into smaller strips to do some other stuff.
Yeah,
but yes, I mean, typically it would be something that we would dispose of through, because we don't have recycling there on the farm. So if we don't go to an outsource to recycle, it ends up in the trash.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rose. That was very informative. You did a great job.